Final Fantasy Tactics is one of the all-time greats in the strategy RPG genre, and while it definitely has a very special, very unique feeling that you won't find exactly in any other game, not even any of its own sequels, I do think that because of its influence on the genre, it is possible to play other similar games. Although, for me, I often find that I'd rather just play FFT again. Now, I want to talk about a game that isn't very similar to Final Fantasy Tactics, and that is Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. Yeah, for some reason, this game was made in a really strange way. It doesn't follow up on the same game design philosophy or the same player feedback loops as the original, and while this did leave a lot of fans who were hoping for a direct sequel probably feeling a bit disappointed, I think enough time has passed that we should examine this game on its own merits. And by that metric, I think it's a really, really good game. Not only that, but I think it's extremely unique. There isn't really any other game that you can play to get a similar feeling to Tactics Advance. Advance 2 is probably the closest thing that exists, and it's still not quite the same. At least if I want to play something that's similar to the original FFT, there are a lot of other clones out there from other developers, but the unique combination of weird game design choices and the way that the player builds their units in Tactics Advance, it's really so different from everything else. If I ever have the urge to play it, there's no clones out there for me to try, so I always find myself coming back to Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. Okay, so let's say that you gave this game a try in the past, and you found the battle system or the unit system to be really clunky, or maybe you want to play this game for the first time, but you're looking for some advice on how to go into it. Well, that's what we're here for today. I might spend a little bit more time complimenting aspects of the game throughout this video, but from now on, let's keep the discussion focused on the game mechanics and how you should play this game in order to get the most out of it. How to manage your guild. This is one of the most important aspects of playing Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, and it's often both overlooked and underrated as a part of the game. People assume there isn't much reason to recruit any characters beyond your basic 4 or 5, you just use Montblanc and Marche, and if you do that, you're gonna end up with a pretty weak guild for several reasons. Additionally, if you don't engage with the ability to recruit new units and manage your roster, you're really missing out on one of the most fun, special, and unique parts of the game. This is the thing that you're not really going to find anywhere else. So, first of all, the most important thing about guild management is to keep the average level of your guild as low as possible, which seems counterintuitive, but when new recruits offer to join you, their level is based on the average level of your guild. If your characters are all level 10, you're going to get a level 10 recruit who joins you. Now, wait a second, doesn't that sound like a good thing? It seems like it would reduce the amount of grinding, and while this is true and you can rely on this somewhat as a way to cut down on the amount of grinding, if that's your goal, the issue is that you really want to control the path of progression for your units and level them in the correct classes as much as possible. So, if a unit joins at a high level, they're probably going to have a mix of randomized growths, which are pretty poor and aren't really optimized for any specific role. You end up with these middling units who perform very poorly, and this often was a big reason why people didn't like the feel of this game while trying to play it. Because your units aren't raised properly, they feel very weak. And then, you recruit new units to replace them, but because the new units join at a high level and they also weren't raised properly, they also feel very weak. If you use these poorly trained units, the game feels like an RNG festival where your units, they just can't hit anything reliably, and when they do, they deal really bad damage. But actually, the difference is, if you raise them properly, they're going to hit their attacks more consistently and for higher damage, and they'll have lots of other advantages. Okay, so how do I keep the average level of my guild low? Well, first of all, Marche and especially Montblanc are, I won't say bad units, but you really want to avoid using them as much as possible. The reason is because, let's say, for example, you mess up a character who is a level 9 generic Dragoon. Well, you can just dismiss this Dragoon from the guild and recruit a new Banga, and then you train the new character with the correct progression to replace them. The problem with Marche and Montblanc is that you can't dismiss them, and you also can't reset their levels. So if you mess up Marche's progression as a unit, there's no way to fix him, and you can't get him out of your party, so he's always dragging the average level of your party up, which makes the new recruits join at higher levels, which we already discussed is not a good thing. On the other hand, Montblanc can be an amazing asset to the guild because he can't be dismissed. If you just leave him at level 1 or level 2, he'll always be dragging the average level of your party down instead of up. In addition to your low-level Montblanc and Marche, if you want to use them, you also should be recruiting a group of low-level characters as early as possible from the various races with various starting jobs, so they have different stat spreads. Now you have to keep in mind, these recruits, they're not just here to fill space and drag down the average level, although they do help with that. Let's say you want a Viera magic user at some point in the future, so you look through your available members and you find your one with the lowest level in the right class with the good starting stats. You can compare your Viera against each other and then see which one is best for the role. Then you take your good unit and you raise that one up. At the most basic level, this is how you build your main party. You pick units among your lower level bench characters and you train them into valuable assets to the team. And while you're doing this, having a single character at level 8 but a bunch of low characters at level 1 will allow you to keep restocking your roster with more level 1 characters later on. This gives you more options to choose from when you start building the next unit. This game has a lot of repeatable jobs that don't require you to fight any enemies or gain any experience. You can use these to recruit new units and learn new abilities on your existing units without leveling them up. This also has the added effect of raising your skills, like your guild trade and your guild negotiation. You get items as rewards for raising these skills. Sometimes you can even get items that are stronger than anything found in the shop, especially early in the game. So really, in a way, you have these low-level errand runners in your guild, but you're role-playing what a guild would actually be doing in this world, other than just playing through the main story. You have your well-trained, strong, and capable guild members who go out to fight powerful opponents and deal battle when that's required by the story, but at the same time, the game allows you and even rewards you for building up this guild that has a large staff with 20 different members who are all helping out the community and performing jobs for people around town and engaging with the world and the story in a more personal way. As one more bonus, these jobs also earn you money so you can buy better gear and other items which will make your battles even easier. Finally, later in the game, you're able to recruit special units that either start with unique abilities or they have unique portraits, and if they join at a low level, you can train them in any way that you want, making them into even more optimized units, and making these special, unique portrait characters feel even more special. Because the original Tactics didn't have a system like this, it's very easy for players coming into Tactics Advance to overlook this facet of the game. But, at least for my money, I think this is one of the best things about Tactics Advance. I just love the ability to have an entire guild working together to complete objectives, and even my low-level members who aren't useful for combat can still be useful for other tasks, and they still contribute to the guild as a whole. And as someone who really loves optimizing and building characters in RPGs, it's really cool to compare 3 or 4 different members with similar starting points and then choosing the best one for a new active combat role and then seeing their growth over time as I train them up. Now, how do I train my units? This is another important feature of the game that I think very often most people don't understand very well, and I don't blame anyone for that. The game doesn't really go out of its way to teach you how to train units, which is unfortunate, because I think the system is actually really, really great and so interesting. Funny enough, it works pretty similar to Dragon's Dogma, which also has the same exact problem. That game doesn't teach you how to train your character properly, and as a result, players often end up with weak characters who feel like they deal low damage, and they aren't very fun to play. But I promise you, if you learn just a few easy tips, you will be training significantly stronger guild members in no time. And unlike Dragon's Dogma, this game allows you to build many characters. You can easily dismiss your bad units and start training new ones from scratch. In fact, the further you get into the game, the easier it becomes to train up new units. Your build is really comprised of 2 different things: abilities and stats. And they both grow on resources that are independent of each other, and that's the key thing to understand. What exactly does that mean? You learn abilities by gaining JP in a job with the correct weapon equipped, and even if you don't contribute to the battle or gain any experience, you can still get JP for participating. You gain stats by leveling up. Every job in the game has different stat growths, so you often need to make sure that your character is spending time gaining JP and learning new abilities in one job, and then switching to a different job when their experience value gets high. Then you gain a level in the desired job, and you gain the good stats that you want them to gain. This probably sounds tedious, but it's nowhere near as bad as you might think. Trust me. For one thing, you can get JP from missions that don't involve battling. This means if you really need a specific ability from a job that you don't want to gain any levels in, or if a character needs to learn a few new abilities to gain access to the job they want for training levels, you can have them perform missions for a while to just get JP. Also, these low-level guild members that you recruited earlier to fill out your roster, they can spend a lot of time learning abilities and unlocking new jobs before you ever send them into battle, so you can always level them in the correct classes. Additionally, if a unit has low experience, you can still send them into battle in a suboptimal job and have them contribute in various ways in order to get JP from the mission. As long as they don't gain 100 experience, they won't level up, so just be a little careful about how you use your units who are still in training. Conveniently, a lot of the best classes for gaining levels are also really strong combat classes, so typically whenever a unit is not farming JP or they're not working on ability gains, you can just keep them in the best combat, caster, or support job for their build, which is also the job that will give them good level up gains. Sometimes, in many cases, the best level up gains. So how can you tell which level up gains are good and which ones are bad in FFTA? For that, I'm going to help you out. Luckily, there are only a few stats in this game, and they're all pretty straightforward in what they do. However, there is a little bit of depth to exactly how each stat works and the exact amount of value it provides for specific builds, something that a new player probably won't figure out easily on their own, and there is a lot of depth when it comes to how each job gains their stats. This is something you really won't figure out unless you use a guide, so let's consider this to be a guide on how to level your characters. Move, jump, and evade are fixed stats. You can change them just by changing your class or equipping items, and they'll never grow or change aside from that, which is actually a good thing, because if you ever need more movement, you can just change into a fast class that jumps really high. There aren't many ways to boost your accuracy, but there are a lot of ways to boost your evade. I recommend using concentration if you're having trouble hitting enemies, because it increases your accuracy by a lot, and if your damage is high enough, you can rely on the fighter type abilities that have high accuracy and low damage. Your high strength value will make up for the lack of accuracy, and you'll still hit very hard, but you won't miss. Additionally, when you attack an enemy from the side, their evade is cut in half, and from behind, their evasion gets reduced to 1/4. This can really help improve your accuracy against fast enemies with high evade. As long as you have 4 movement, you can always get behind an enemy who is right next to you, so this is pretty easy to pull off consistently. Attack determines your damage with weapons, and defense reduces the damage you take from weapons. Magic is your magic attack damage, and resistance lowers the enemy magic damage. It's pretty straightforward on that front. HP is a pretty good resource because, well, when you run out of HP, you die. Plus, it's equally good against physical and magical attacks because 16 damage is just 16 damage. So this makes HP more broadly useful as a defensive stat. You're probably familiar with this concept if you play Pokemon, or really most other RPGs. Now, it might be tough to visualize this, but your HP is a static pool. Every time you take damage, the number decreases. So, if we say that 50 HP is worth 50 HP of value, this would be accurate. But defense and resistance are a little bit different. You see, every time you get attacked, your defense value is called. This means that the defense stat can actually build up value over time, the more times you are attacked. Unfortunately, defense and resistance are cut in half against the relevant attack from the enemy, so their value is a little bit lower than what you'd expect. To keep things simple, if you have 50 defense and you get attacked 4 times, this is worth 100 HP of value. Knowing all of the math isn't super important. You don't even really need to understand it. Just believe me when I say this. If you get attacked 3 or more times during a battle, 1 point of defense is worth more than 1 point of HP. Attack is thankfully much more straightforward. 1 point of attack is just 1 point of damage. But one tip that can be very helpful for new players is the exact function of the items you bring with you on quests. Whenever you go on a quest, you often get the option to bring an item or two with you, right? Well, sometimes these items show little symbols on them. The triangle symbol gives you a small boost in attack power with that element. The circle gives a bigger boost, and the bullseye circle gives an even larger boost. Keep that in mind, especially early on, because this extra damage can really help swing battles in your favor when your builds are incomplete. It's another one of those mechanics that the game doesn't ever explain to you, but it would make the experience a lot smoother for players who feel like their characters, especially their mages, aren't dealing enough damage. Your Blizzard will be stronger if you bring an item that increases the ice element, and in most cases, these items don't even get used up, so you can just bring them over and over again to every battle. Lastly, and concerning the mages we're already talking about, if you run out of MP, you won't be able to cast any spells, and this can make a spellcaster pretty suddenly feel completely useless. But you regenerate a small amount of MP each turn, and overall, this problem, you'll usually only deal with it very early on in the game when your MP total is very low. In general, if you're leveling in a class that is meant to be casting spells, you'll probably have enough MP, even if you're using a combination of abilities with high MP cost. Leveling in a class with high MP growth will let you access these powerful spells and ability combinations even sooner, so that's a consideration when you're choosing what class to level in. Speed, though, is a little bit more tricky, and it throws a wrench in a lot of this. Speed is definitely the best stat, without a doubt. Anyone who has ever played any strategy RPG, any tabletop RPG, even if you've just played Pokemon, you know that action economy is king. The more often you can take actions, the better. Going first is better. Now certainly, there are ways to overcome this advantage, but there's no way to completely nullify it. There's no trick room in this game, or anything like that. Being faster is just universally better for every build. You want to be as fast as possible. Fast characters make great use of haste, better than slow characters, and fast characters have a better chance of keeping up, even if they're hit with speed debuffs. Speed in Tactics Advance is also linear, so in theory, if you have twice as much speed, you actually get to attack twice for each time that your opponent attacks once. Now, because of some of the behind-the-scenes stuff with the code, it doesn't work out exactly like this, but it's close enough. And the system sometimes makes it so that being just slightly faster than the opponent is actually a lot better. So trust me, you want to outspeed your opponents in this game. Additionally, the speed growth works differently from all of the other stats in one really important way. The amount of speed you gain per level is very low, and this means speed has an even bigger impact on the game over a long period of time. You see, if a character could only gain 11 speed instead of 10 speed, well, they'd be 10% faster, and that's a bit, but it's not game-changing. This is how the attack, defense, and other values work. However, the way speed actually works is very different. Oftentimes, you're making a choice between gaining 2 speed in a fast class versus 1 speed in a slow class. Now this ends up being 20 speed versus the original 10. So that is 100% faster, and it is a huge difference. You must level in classes with good speed growths. It is so important to raising good characters. If you ever played this game in the past without really knowing what you were doing, and at a certain point enemy units were running circles around you, this is why. Now, at the end of the day, you still have to balance out your need for speed against your damage output and other factors, but there's no getting around the fact that speed is really the king of stats here, and as we'll find out later, many of the high speed classes also just have good stats across the board. I ended up cutting a lot of material from this section because it was just too much, but I can certainly make a dedicated video talking about the classes in depth if people want me to do that, especially for the weird classes like Blue Mage and Beast Hunter that probably require a lot of discussion, but that's outside of the scope of this video. For today, let's just talk about the classes that have good growth rates for each playable race, and which ones you should consider for training purposes. As long as your characters are well trained, you can sub them into any other class and have them perform their role in their main class. That's the key takeaway here. Okay, let's get into it. Now, your humans make pretty solid physical attackers. They just have a good balance of speed, damage output, and bulk in a way that doesn't feel like a detriment. It's not like you're mediocre at everything, lacking in specialty. No, you're just good at everything. You have no weakness. If you're planning to make your human into a physical attacker, I recommend getting access to Ninja as soon as you can. Ninja only has 10% less attack than the fighter, and I kid you not, it is twice as fast. There is no comparison here. Okay, so until you can become a ninja, what should you do? Thief is a good option early on. It's slightly slower and slightly weaker than the ninja, but it does have better defensive stats, so it's not a complete downgrade. Soldier is a good alternative if you want to build attack power and defense early on, and then switch to ninja later for gaining speed and attack. Archer, Paladin, and Hunter have abilities that you may want to learn, but make sure not to gain any levels in these jobs. They simply have lower and worse growth rates across the board, notably speed, the most important stat. Just use these classes to gain JP without getting experience, and then swap back to a good leveling class once you have your abilities. When it comes to magic users, we run into a similar problem. You see, Ninja is just really good for leveling, no matter what you're trying to do. Its magic attack power is only slightly lower than White Mage, Black Mage, and Blue Mage. It's faster than all of the casting jobs by a wide margin. You see where this is going, right? It's the same issue we had with the fighter job. You just level as a ninja, you get slightly less magic attack and way more speed, and then you can swap to your magic class to gain abilities and to utilize those abilities once you've finished training your speed stat up to a different level. There is one problem with the ninja, because the ninja does have notably really bad MP growth, and while MP isn't the most important stat, it does matter to the extent that you can't afford to run out of it. So at some point in time, whether you want to do it early or if you want to do it late, you can gain a few levels as an illusionist in order to pick up some extra MP and magic attack. If you really need MP early on and you can't wait for illusionist, you can use White Mage. It has more MP and more speed than the Black Mage, so it's less of a detriment for an early game option. But in summary, the ninja is really the best leveling class for humans, and you can just pivot into a physical or magical attacker build out of the ninja class later on. If you want to level early, you can use a White Mage for magical units or a Thief for physical units, and later on, Illusionist can be good for making your MP and your magic attack as high as possible, while Soldier is good for optimizing your physical bulk and attack. But just remember to prioritize speed, because it really is important. Now, after saying all of this, you probably understand why I warned you not to use Marche too much. He can gain a lot of levels by accident in a weak class long before he ever gains access to the ninja job. The Banga are pretty straightforward. They have a lot of similarities with the humans as really solid physical attacking units, and they have one job that kind of dominates the discussion when it comes to leveling your stats. But there's a little more nuance with the Banga, because nothing in this list is as universally powerful as the ninja. So first, let's talk about the White Monk. Like the ninja, this is your high speed job, and like the ninja, it gives solid strength and magic growth. This allows you to branch out into a melee fighter or a caster later on as you prefer. But there are two big differences. First of all, you have access to White Monk right away. This makes Banga very solid early game units because you can level them up in one of their best classes as soon as they join the party, especially if you're planning to make them into a magic user. The Banga aren't traditionally a spellcasting race, but we'll talk about their magic jobs anyway. Bishop and Templar both have access to magical abilities. Unfortunately, both classes are very slow, and they barely have more magic than the White Monk. So realistically, you can just train a White Monk early on, and then worry about accessing your magical abilities later on. The Bishop is better than the Templar in MP, speed, and magic attack. For that reason, if you want to settle into a magic class later, Bishop is the way to go. Just make sure you've already built up enough speed before you do that. In general, Bishop, Templar, Warrior, and Defender are classes that you should avoid leveling in, and just use them to get access to their abilities. Now, Gladiator is the other main point where the Banga differ and where they really shine, but it does require you to hold off a little bit on leveling if you want to optimize to the fullest extent. You see, Gladiator here is supposed to be like the fighter of the Banga class. It has the highest attack power, and you would assume it would be a little slower than the monk to compensate. But no, it's actually faster than the monk and the dragoon, and it's stronger than both. If you're building a physical attacking Banga, you want to get them into Gladiator as soon as possible, and just level up here whenever you can. Still, Monk is a solid early game leveling class, and Monk is even better with how it allows you to pivot into a Gladiator or a Bishop later on. So it's not too bad to level as a Monk, unless you know for sure that you want to go 100% Gladiator. And if you're willing to do that and you have the patience, you can get a really strong Banga. I will caution at this point, because I've talked a lot about classes and gaining levels and how you use them to learn abilities and stats, but you have to remember this game isn't just a level up simulator. You also have to fight enemies and complete objectives, so keep that in mind. There's obviously nothing wrong with using the Templar class and equipping abilities from the Bishop as your secondary access, if that's what you find to be the most fun or the most useful when fighting. Even if the Templar is traditionally slow, if you level up their speed, you can make a fast Templar. To put it another way, this guide is only talking about which classes are best for training. It's not saying that Monk or Gladiator are better than Templar in battle. I hope I'm making that clear enough. If you've watched this much of the video, I'm guessing you understand and you find this stuff as interesting as I do, because you're still listening, but maybe you just have YouTube running in the background and you're barely paying attention, or you just fell asleep while browsing. Either way, I appreciate it, so let's move on to the next one. Viera are the super speedy race. They're so fast across the board, and as a result, even their middle speed classes aren't so much slower than their high speed classes. Ninja is twice as fast as the other humans, and Gladiator can even be twice as fast as a Banga warrior. But with Viera, the speed gap is much more narrow. It's more like 1.5 times as fast, which is still important, so I do recommend the Assassin for very similar reasons to the human ninja. Assassin is always guaranteed 2 speed, and if you're lucky, it can even get 3 speed on some level ups. But because a lot of the other Viera classes have very high speed growths, they will often get 2 speed anyway, and so the advantage of the Assassin class won't be as prominent. You're not going to feel it every level. But still, if you're trying to make the fastest character to gank enemy teams, you should absolutely go with Assassin as your leveling class. Plus, its real advantage lies in the fact that, just like the ninja, it has hard-hitting strength and magic growths, and this makes it outspeed, but also keeps up in damage with the competition classes, at least for training purposes. In particular, the Assassin is actually the hardest hitting physical Viera class too, so for physical Viera, there is really no competition here. You want to get them into Assassin as soon as possible and level exclusively in this class to make a true powerhouse. Until then, Archer and Fencer are roughly equal. Archer might see a faster unit at the end of the day, and Fencer will make for a slightly stronger attack, but the difference will be minor unless you level more than 10 times before you ever reach the Assassin. Remember that with the Viera you recruit and leave on the bench as level 1 units, you can pick the one with the best speed and the best attack, and then wait until later in the game when they have access to the Assassin class from level 1, and then you level them purely as an Assassin. This is true optimization, and the difference you find over 20 or 30 levels will be very prominent. As for the magic users, again, Assassin really shines here. It doesn't have the same problem as the ninja. It has barely less MP than the summoner and barely less magical attack. I mean, technically speaking, if you want to drop an absolute meteor on the enemy team with the hardest hitting magical bomb possible, you will need to use the summoner class to maximize your damage output, but we're talking about 15% more damage, and in exchange, summoner is actually the slowest Viera class, so you lose a lot of speed in the exchange. I'm not sure if that's worth it, especially with other races being better at hard-hitting magic attacks. But all of the other magic classes are just strictly worse than the Assassin, so Viera are really all about the Assassin class. No matter what build you want to use, you should train in the Assassin class whenever possible. You can call up your Viera on 0 experience and switch them over to their main job to help sweep the enemy team for important battles, but then be sure to turn them back into Assassins for the next training session. I admit, on this point, The Viera are the most tedious race to use just because of the fact that the assassin is so powerful and none of their other classes have very good use cases, like with the humans and the Banga having alternate jobs that work for growths. But let's not lose perspective here. Like I said before, Viera are really fast overall, so even if you level as an archer, fencer, or elementalist, you're still going to get good growths and they'll still be really stable, and you're very likely going to get 2 speed per level anyway. You just won't ever get the sometimes 3 speed. It does make me wish the speed growths were a bit more balanced and more deterministic in this game, but I actually have a lot of fun micromanaging my units and training my roster, but I could see how this talk about switching your Viera between classes every battle, and sometimes having to make sure that they don't gain levels during battle, it could seem extremely unfun to some people. In this game, where speed is king, we also have the Numo. They are the slowest race, opposite of the Viera in many ways. Nearly all of their jobs are similarly slow, with a few dreadful turtles that stand out and must be avoided, but overall, they are the most susceptible to getting hurt by randomness during level ups. Many of the Numo classes, like Black Mage, Illusionist, Sage, and Alchemist, all have a chance to get 0 speed on a level up, so you really probably should avoid these classes, even if that chance is small, although there is an exception with the Alchemist. For physical attackers, Beastmaster is a pretty self-contained class. It has the stats to do everything that it wants to do, and it has good speed, so you can just play a Beastmaster without jumping around between classes very much, unless you want to pick up abilities from other jobs, and this does make Beastmaster, weirdly enough, one of the easiest classes to use in the game. That being said, Numo are really all about the magic, so let's talk about their magic classes. For training purposes, I really like the White Mage early on. Time Mage can be better for gaining magic attack later. Morpher is technically your fastest class, but there are a lot of Numo jobs that are guaranteed to get 1 speed, and the Morpher is barely any more likely to get the 2 speed per level, so you won't see much of a difference, and in my opinion, it's one of the few cases where it's not worth the tedium of switching classes. Just avoid the low speed classes that I mentioned before, and go with your instincts on picking classes that have guaranteed 1 speed. However, if you are feeling lucky, I actually think Alchemist is the safest one of the bunch. You see, the Alchemist gets 1 speed 90% of the time, and he has fantastic MP and magic attack. This can help you in the long run with a dedicated caster, and unless you get unlucky with your level ups, he will typically have the same speed as the White Mage, or be slightly slower. Overall, I think the Numo are the least tedious race to use, just because of the fact that they have several good leveling options, and they all give guaranteed 1 speed, so you don't really need to worry too much beyond that. Let me summarize it again just to make things basic. White Mage and Time Mage are both good leveling options, with Time Mage being more offensive. With Alchemist, it's slightly more risky, but you get more attack power and MP overall, as long as you're willing to risk the chance of getting 0 speed 10% of the time. Beastmaster and Morpher are your best options for a physical class here, namely the Beastmaster, but really, physical Numo isn't the way to go. But if you want to, you can just stick with Beastmaster the whole time, and it's very self-contained and very easy to train that way. In my opinion, this is the most clearly defined race in what they are supposed to be doing, and they are supposed to be slow casters. One useful trait of the Time Mage is that it can use the Quicken spell to make an ally instantly act on the next turn. Think of this like using a Dancer in Fire Emblem. You have your Numo as a unit who basically gives up their own turn in order to let your best unit act again. I can't say for sure if this is strictly better or strictly worse than just replacing the Numo with a better unit, instead of just having them cast Quicken on a better unit, but I suppose that's up to you and your preferred playstyle. Lastly, we'll talk about the flagship mascots of the Final Fantasy series. In this game, Moogle are a playable race, and they're a major part of the game. You can recruit a ton of them. You could even make a guild exclusively using Moogle. That's pretty difficult to do in pretty much every other Final Fantasy game, and it's one of the many unique things about Tactics Advance that I kinda love. I never even really thought about it or appreciated it until I started writing this script, but it's true. Moogle is another pretty fast race, similar to the Viera, but they're not quite as fast. However, they have a few really distinct properties that set them apart from every other race, in my opinion anyway, and makes them better as beginner classes as opposed to the Viera, which are more advanced late game classes. Similar to the new Mo, the Moogle have very defined roles, and they have 3 good jobs for leveling, which gives you a lot of options and a lot of freedom early on. The Thief, Animist, and Black Mage are all suitable, and you have access to all 3 of them at the beginning of the game. Unfortunately, it was more difficult for me to find the exact numbers on the Moogle jobs compared to the other races. I'm not sure why, but a lot of the guides for this game were written like 20 years ago, and for whatever reason, they weren't interested in doing a complete data mine for the Moogles after they finished the other 4 races. What I can tell you is that Moogles have 2 classes that are really strongly worth considering. So for physical units, they're similar to humans. They want to level as a thief early on, but they don't have a ninja option to pivot into later, so regardless of what physical attack Moogle you want to run eventually, it's usually a good idea to just keep leveling as a thief whenever you can. But if you want to pick some extra firepower, the Mog Knight class is your alternative. You'll only gain about 10 or 20% extra attack, but you could lose out on a lot of speed, so be careful. What I love about the Moogles in this game and what makes them special is their unique Black Mage option and growth rates. You see, with most of the other races we discussed, I said not to level in the Black Mage job. This is because they hit a little bit harder compared to the alternatives, but is usually much slower than the White Mage and the other top tier options. But the Moogle is the one race that has a very fast Black Mage. This means that your magic Moogles are similar to Banga. They have access to their best leveling class right away, and unlike the Banga, they can stay as a Black Mage for basically the entire game, and they actually are designed as a magic race. So you can switch to a different casting class later on, or you can just level in other casting jobs to pick up abilities, and then always come back to the Black Mage as your main job. This means that you can raise your Moogle right away from the start of the game as thieves, as Black Mages, and you can even put levels into Animist because it's decently fast, it can keep up with the others, but it gives you good bulk early on, without sacrificing speed or physical attack. It's not really as tedious to manage the level up growths of the Moogle compared to the Viera or the humans, which have those dominant classes that you only get later on. So, to give yourself the best possible experience playing this game, if you don't want to get too deep into micromanagement, here's the class progressions that I would recommend on your early game units. Humans can start as thieves and become ninja later on to turn into fast, hard-hitting attackers. But if you find their performance to be lacking, you can replace them later with new humans that you can level up as ninja and then switch them into a physical or a magical attacking role. With Banga, you can really rely on them early on to bolster your attack power and speed in the early game as powerful, hard-hitting monks. But if you want to transition them later into a magical class later on, you can do that, which is really unique. Most games don't have characters that start off as physical bruisers and then switch to casters, and yet here, it's actually the most optimal path for an early game Banga. Plus, if you want to raise a physical Banga, which can be one of the most dominant melee attackers on the battlefield, you can raise them as a gladiator as much as possible. But monk is still okay early on, if you're willing to wait on the gladiator access before leveling. The Viera is really all about the assassin class, just like we talked about. And it's not easy to access, and it's a little bit tedious to manage, so they're not as great for the early game. But if you want to use Viera early on and approach your build more casually, I recommend starting as a fencer. You're going to get more attack power here, and then later on, when you get access to assassin, the speed you get later will make up for the difference. If you start as an archer and then branch into assassin later, you're basically going to get a character who has speed but lacks power. Don't get it twisted though. A character who is raised as an assassin can make a very powerful archer or a hunter, and being able to attack at range with high attack speed and damage output is really strong. But that's a goal for later on, when you're really starting to optimize your mid-game and end-game builds. You have to be willing to put in the time and have the patience to do that, to raise a Viera starting as an assassin and then switch them over to an archer, or switch them over to a physical attacker, or you can even switch them into a magical attacker later on. But this is all harder to make work, and you have to wait a while to start building them. If it does sound fun to train a Viera after everything that I've said in this video, I do recommend trying it yourself and seeing if you can pull it off, because it is fun and it is rewarding, as long as this type of gameplay appeals to you. Otherwise, to summarize, if you want to play more casually, I recommend either avoiding the Viera or just leveling them as a fencer and then transitioning into an assassin later. The new Mo should be raised as a white mage if you plan to use one, which is good news because it's their starting class, and it makes for a solid early game healer to keep your party alive in some of those tough battles at the start of the game. There's no downside to doing this, even in the long term, because the white mage is still good as a long-term growth class. This makes the new Mo one of the easiest races to use, but it will still be one of the slowest in the long run, and this can make them fall off over time. What you can do is switch to a time mage later on, and this will allow them to use Quicken on your other allies. This will boost your action economy of your party as a whole, so there is a way to keep your new Mo viable in the long term by changing them into a support character as a time mage. Also, there is value in RPG and strategy games to slow healing, so there is that to consider. Generally, you want to heal after the enemies have dealt damage, so if your healer is your slowest party member, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Well, if you want to make a physical attacking Numo, or the class just sounds interesting to you, make them a Beastmaster right away. In fact, what you should do is make sure to recruit a Beastmaster instead of using the default White Mage Numo who starts in your clan. You'll get better physical stats as a base, and then you can raise your Beastmaster without worrying about changing his class, and you can play with the unique abilities, and it can be really fun. And once again, it's very easy to do this. It doesn't require any tedious job changing or level up management. It's very beginner friendly. For any new Mo, if you want to try and fix their speed, the only way to do this is by getting them into the Morpher class, but even that isn't very reliable. Last, but surely not least, is our company friend, the Moogle. Now, unless you really like Montblanc's unique portrait, I recommend leaving him at level 1, so he doesn't permanently increase the average level of your party, but this may be a level of metagaming that goes beyond your playstyle, which I totally understand. Black Mage is a solid leveling class and a solid main class for Moogles, and it's the offensive equivalent to the new Mo, as well as the Banga's Gladiator. It's very easy to use. You just level them as Black Mage, and you don't really need to worry about anything else, which you can do with Montblanc because he starts as a Black Mage. Thief is a good starting point if you want to pivot into a physical class later on, or if you just want to build mages later on who are going to have really fast speed. And if you're willing to sacrifice a bit of speed, you can invest into Onomist for a little bit more bulk, or Mog Knight for a little bit more attack. All of these options are available pretty much right away, so you don't need to worry about delaying your level ups like with the other races. You can just train them in your basic classes and then splash them into other jobs later. You can get good abilities from those other jobs, or you can even set those jobs as your main job. Either way, Moogles are just really good all around for beginners. Just make sure if you're trying to build a fast one to recruit a new Moogle as a thief so they have good speed in their starting base set of stats, and then raise them as a thief to get even more speed. Okay, wow, so even with all of the material I cut, I still feel like I talked so much about the extremely deep and diverse class, character, race, and build systems in this game, and even how to manage your guild, but I hope I was able to highlight some of the things that I love about this game, the features that make it so unique and not play like anything else, and what I described didn't sound so tedious that it makes you want to run away and never touch this game again. Because I promise, if you're willing to get into it, it's not as bad as you might think, and it can be a lot of fun for the right type of gamer, which is definitely me. The concept of training in one class to get experience and stats, and then switching to another class to get JP and abilities is pretty straightforward once you wrap your head around it. And there's only a few top tier leveling classes in each race, so once you know what those are, it makes things pretty easy to keep track of. You're not going to be coming back and consulting this guide over and over again because you're forgetting how to do it. You're going to remember that Ninja is the best leveling class and just level as a Ninja. But, of course, you can always let me know what you think coming away from this video. I'm primarily interested in getting to read other people's thoughts, so really don't hesitate to share those. I would like to make another video talking about how you can get access to the best thief abilities way before it's ever intended and break the game wide open, which fundamentally changes the Tactics Advance experience. I could also make a more in-depth guide on the classes. I could make a video about how to recruit the secret characters, and really, I have a lot more to say about Tactics Advance, if people want to hear about it. But for now, enjoy the rest of your day.